active ingredients for other companies. So we're a contract manufacturer. In fact, I just had a film crew come through for our 15-year Corden anniversary. So there'll be a publicly available video, professional video, in about a month, in October sometime, which I'll send a link to you guys if you want to see. It's a rare glimpse inside of a pharmaceutical plant. So, but that's what I've been doing for the last 2.5 years. In fact, we work on one of the public things we can share is that we work on the Moderna vaccine, an excipient for that. And I think we made 150 million doses or something equivalent of this this lipid excipient that goes in their formulation. So hopefully that if you've taken the Moderna vaccine, you've probably got some lipid from our plant in Boulder. So anyway, my background is in chemical engineering. I'm a chemical engineer by training. My job is director of operations at this pharmaceutical plant. So I've worked in different plants around the world. I used to live in Vancouver, British Columbia, and most recently I was in Wisconsin and Milwaukee. So in those two places, I joined the NAWCC chapters. And so this talk, I gave a version of it back maybe 8 years ago when I was in Vancouver. And so if somebody who is familiar with that may see some things that are similar, but I've had some new stuff that I've learned in the last 8 years. So I'll jump right in and start sharing. And let me know if you can see this or not. Hopefully you can. Everybody's, yes, okay, thank you, great. So the topic for tonight is rare Hamilton military watches from World War I to World War II. I inherited a watch from my grandfather, a 36 size Hamilton chronometer from World War I, and that got me all excited about this topic. And my grandpa was a watchmaker and back since like 1940. And so I guess I inherited the bug from him. And so that started about 15 years ago, and now I'm still learning every day. So I wish I could say I'm an expert on this topic. I would defer to experts, some of whom are on this call, who are really, really knowledgeable about this topic. So hopefully I can share what I've learned, and you guys can ask any questions or raise a question in the chat if needed, and I will try to answer them. Otherwise, I'll try to get through these slides as quick as I can. I know it's getting late, so let's get jumping in. So the agenda for tonight is to look at the Hamilton Watch Company. So this is one of my favorite pocket watch companies. I have a collection of them. I inherited from Grandpa and some that I bought. And we're going to talk about the early history of Hamilton. Hopefully this is a review for some of you and maybe some new information for others. And then jump into timepieces from World War I. And then a lot of focus is on World War II watches and chronometers. And then the newest thing I've added to this presentation is on some prototype watches, which I was able to acquire a few of in the last few years. Yeah, so that's kind of exciting, and things that some of them which turned into production watches and some of them which didn't. So those are kind of exciting for me these days. And then I'm not going to cover wristwatches. My anecdote for the regional that I went to with a few weeks ago, I thought it was fantastic. I haven't gone to a watch show in a few years, but everybody wanted to buy all my wristwatches from me. So I got cleaned out of all wristwatches. I felt a little bit like chum in the water with the wristwatch folks. And I sold one pocket watch, but it turned out to be a military pocket watch. So that was kind of cool. So, and really exciting getting to meet some of you folks that I've only seen on Zoom calls, and hope to get to meet you in person when we start meetings live again, hopefully next month. So I'm going to jump right in here. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So Hamilton Watch Company has an interesting early history. It started out with a bunch of different versions: Adams and Perry, Lancaster, Pennsylvania Watch Company. And you can see that about every 3 to 6 years or so, they basically ran out of money and recapitalized and started to change the name and moved on. And so finally up until 1892, when Hamilton Watch Company was really kind of settled down, it was basically the assets from Keystone Watch Company in Lancaster, and then Aurora, Illinois Watch Company. They moved all the assets from there and started Hamilton Watch Company. And so you might ask the question, why did Hamilton stick while these other 4 or 5 different versions didn't really make it? And so one of the reasons is they basically, if you read the history, is the undercapitalization of the previous companies. I think people were optimistic on how much money it would take to make a watch company and pay all the workers and get all the raw materials. And eventually they would make some watches and run out of money and start another company. So another sort of reason is because of the Ohio train wreck in April of 1891, where a commuter train crashed into I think an express train and caused a lot of casualties. And so that really kind of drove the railroad standards. And so Hamilton Watch is the railroad timekeeper of America. That was very timely for them. And I think that the quality of the watch was good. So they were, I think they just also played with their partnership with Webb C. Ball from Ohio. And so that all those things kind of combined with the right management to make a watch company that actually survived. And this is a picture of the watch factory. I've been to Lancaster. I've not been able to see if this is still around, but I think it is. But it may be apartment buildings or something like that. But I don't know, Tim, if you are familiar with that or not. But anyway, this is a ginormous factory with hundreds and hundreds of workers in its day. So so that's the early history that I know. And so just to kind of give you a little background, these are some of the milestones from Hamilton, some of the first watches that they produced. In fact, these 2 pictures here are Hamilton #1 and #2, which are the property of NAWCC, and I believe are in the museum in Pennsylvania there. You can see that they started making 16 size watches in the late 1890s, and then 0 size wrist watches into 1917 World War I timeframe. And then one of the watches that my grandfather gave me, this chronometer watch from 1918, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, was part of their entry into World War I, helping the war effort. So okay, so let's jump into World War I, because I think there's some 2 or 3. I think I've got 3 different watches here, which are pretty neat, and I've been really doing a lot of research on them. So I'm going to share with you as much as I know about them. Some of you may have more information, but the first one is 992, grade 992, which is a 21 jewel 16 size watch. So they made lots of 992 watches. These are their workhorse. They probably made them for 30 years or so, and they probably made close to 1 million of them. But a very select few of them were grabbed from the line and gave a dial that's called Engineer Corps USA with a number on it. And they ordered 1,000 of these for the Great War in 1918. And my understanding is these watches were used to time the railway that was built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in France to supply Pershing's army. So there was a NAWCC bulletin article written about this in June of 2000, so you can look that up. The neat thing is that each one of these watches is unique. As far as I know, they all have a number on them, 1 through 1,000. So I've been keeping track of them as much as I can. I bought my first one when I lived in Canada, and I've been buying them as many as I can ever since then. So they look something like this. Just really a normal watch, except for this dial, and really nothing special about the movement. They just took watches off the line, and so here's what I call the database. This was published, a version of it probably when I had half of these numbers. These are the serial numbers on the dials. You can see they go from number 13 all the way up to number 992, and I'm sure there's other ones, but these are the ones that I've been able to track. Out of the 1,000 watches, I've tracked about 60 or 61 in the last 15, 16 years. But what happens is when you publish something like this online, then people use it against you when you go to buy the watch. So I went to the National in Dayton, Ohio, and I saw a watch that had the dial that has the engineer core on it. And I got excited about it and told my son, and he said, "Yeah, there it is, Dad, let's buy that." And the gentleman who I bought it from said, "Hey, this is a really rare watch." And he pulled out an article from one of the message boards that this Tim refers to. There's a lot of information there. And it was my article that I wrote on it. So I ended up paying about twice as much as probably I did the previous watches, but that's okay. I'd like to get the message out about these things. And usually the reason I do this kind of research is to kind of look at the data. I'm as a scientist, as a chemical engineer, I'm really data driven. So one of the things you can look at is when they pull these serial numbers, dial serial numbers, they just grab watches off the line, generally about 1.2 to 1.3 million serial number. And so if you see one that has a 2.5 serial number, you know that can't be right. That's way past 1918. So it probably got swapped out at some point. And that's what happens over the years, right? That people swap out watches and dials and things like that. And also, if you do the research, you go find that there's two different kinds of cases: Philadelphia Silver Road and Phase or Silver. And the serial number ranges, they become you see those same ones over and over again. So if you see it in a gold-filled case, for example, it didn't come that way. So that's why I like to do the research, and I like to share as much knowledge as I have. So these are cool watches, and I even did some digging online, and you could see the original order here in 1918 from the Hamilton Records Department. They ordered July 29th in 1918. There was 200 and 150 delivered, and August 6th and August 15th, August 23rd. So you can really get down to the details if you dig some information out of the internet. And these were $22 each back then, and I could tell you they go for a lot more than that now. And here's a 1919 article from National Geographic where it says Hamilton watches time American railroads in France. So it's basically an advertisement about that these watches, even though it doesn't have a picture of them, kind of showing how the American ingenuity and American watches are helping win the war, kind of thing. So anyway, so that's part of the fun about pocket watches, especially the military ones, is they connect to some, historical events usually. And so that's part of the reason why I like them so much. Another version of a World War I timepiece was 18 size watch, grade 938. So nothing really special about these watches. They made 700 of them for military use. And the only thing different about them is they have this little wire here. I don't know if you can see that very well, but what that wire is when you pull up the crown, the little wire comes out and touches the balance wheel and stops it. So that allows you to hack or connect this watch with, let's say, a chronometer. You'll set the watch at 0 seconds, 1 minute ahead of the chronometer. And then as soon as the chronometer reaches 12 o'clock or 0 seconds, then you can push the crown down, and now you're synchronized with the chronometers or any other watch. So they came in sterling silver cases made by Phase, and they look something like this. So yeah, really pretty watches, but really nothing special other than some of them, or a number of them, are fitted with this hacking function. And most of them came in these cases that said US Navy number, whatever. So these are scarce. Like I said, only 700 were made, and so again, these there's a lot of information online. A lot of these watches are. I go back to auction results from Skinner or Jones Horan, and there's really a lot of pictures and information, and so that's where I get a lot of my information from. So that's a 18 size watch, and then the one that I was talking about earlier, this 36 size torpedo boat watch. This is one of my favorite timepieces. It's kind of unique in that it's a wind indicator. and it's a giant sterling silver pocket watch. It probably weighs a couple 100 grams. And the hand, it's you don't really want to put it in your pocket for sure. But it's a 56-hour wind indicator, 21 joule movement, and these are very, very accurate watches. I can tell you from experience. So they're well designed. There was about 500 that were made in this kind of sterling silver case, and then the other ones later on I'll show you were made, and they were in gimbals, and they were key wind and key sets. So they were sold for the war effort, but then the leftovers were sold to jewelers and other people, maybe people who had boats and wanted to do navigation, because they're very accurate timepieces for longitude. And so, yeah, they were sold all the way up into the 40s, the leftovers. This is what it looks like from the dial side. So there's a wind indicator. This is almost like a battery reserve. So you can, once you wind it up, this little dial will go over and tell you how many hours you have until the watch winds down, which is useful when you're in the middle of the ocean. So you don't want your clock to stop, and then you'll lose your location, basically, as Tim talked about in his. Back then they didn't have GPSs, so they had to do navigation by sextant and other things. So yeah, and the movement's real pretty and sort of simple, but very, very accurate timepiece. And again, this is the sterling silver Crescent Watch Case Company case. This is an advertisement from the 1940s, where they have this 36 size in the gimbal version. Again, like I said, this is basically to help sell these little excess inventory to people with, boats and things like that. So. And then this is, again, like I said, I like to do a lot of research. So out of the 970 serial numbers that were originally set aside, I've documented about 79 of these watches. And they all start with 1260, and they go up to 1260 970. So the this first group of 500, it was in the sterling silver cases. It's roughly 500. And then these last, say, 300 or so, or almost 400, were in the gimbals, in the wooden boxes, and about half of those have the wind indicator on them, and about half don't. So my understanding is, since I had one of these watches serviced, that there's no parts and things like that. So they just removed the wind indicator when the parts wore out, and so you have some with and without the wind indication. But again, really rare watch, and these go for several $1,000s whenever you find one for sale. So one more watch I'll talk about before we get to World War II, and this is grade 974 special. So this is a 16 size watch that only 81 were produced. So this is very similar to the grade 938 18 size that was produced in 1918. This is in 1938, made for the U.S. Navy Bureau of Navigation. And again, these watches have that hacking function. When you pull up the crown, you can stop the second hand. And they all have similar serial numbers. And the cases all are unique. They say number, like this one I have is number 9, but they might say number 36 or whatever, dash 1938. And this is what the movement looks like. So again, not much different than a normal production grade 974 special. And the dial is a bit unique. It looks like later on, and I'll show you, we have Hamilton 2974B. It's got like a double train track sort of seconds area. So, and this hands and things are kind of a precursor to some World War II watches. But anyway, this is a comparing watch that you would use to keep time and connect it to your chronometer on your boat. So really rare watch, only 81 produced. And I've only tracked about 4 or 5 of these in the sales in the last 10 or 15 years. Okay, that's the watches that I know of up to around 1938. Some changes to Hamilton after World War I. So in 1928, they purchased the Illinois Watch Company, and it was changed from Illinois Watch Co. to Illinois Watch. So that's really a big milestone, because after that, some of the most amazing railroad grade pocket watches, the Bund specials and things like that, were made under the Hamilton. They're still under the Illinois name, but within the Hamilton factories. And then they also bought Howard Watch Company rights, 1931. But the real interesting thing is, from a military watch perspective, is that they did a lot of research, and they embraced this Ellenvar hairspring alloy, which is essentially anti-magnetic and has a lot of cool properties. It's a nickel alloy that I think Guillaume got the Nobel Prize for inventing back in the 20s or something like that. So, and then Ellenvar Extra was basically their bread and butter for the watches they made in World War II. And this eliminated what they call the middle temperature error, which is in this slide here. It's from a technical bulletin from Hamilton. It basically is the difference between when the brass and the steel expands with temperature, and then the elasticity of the steel decreases. And so you get this little tiny error that comes from the old way, the old brass and steel. You had the middle temperature error. So the Ellenvar took care of that and really was impervious to temperature changes. So some of you probably know a lot more about that than I do, so I won't expound on that. But the neat thing is, in 1941, they basically, and this is something that you try to imagine today, right? They converted all the factory over to wartime manufacturing. They made no watches for civilians, and just made watches for the U.S. government and chronometers. So that was, we almost had that at my factory when we were making part of the COVID vaccine and excipient for it for Moderna. We basically were told by the U.S. government, you're going to make that, and they helped us with all the raw materials and the supply chain and all that kind of stuff. So not quite the same, but it feels a little bit similar in that it was a national emergency, right? So anyway, so let's move on to World War II. Yeah, World War II timepieces. So this is, there's quite a few here, and then I'll go through them fairly quickly. I'll have these slides available if anybody wants. I'll share any information with you if you want to dig in. So I won't dig into all the details, but I'll just kind of show you the breadth and depth of all the different timepieces that they made during that time frame. So the first one, they made 992Bs starting in 1941 all the way up until the late 60s. But they made about 19,000 for the war effort during 1941 and 1945. And so these are marked either US government on the movement. They're normal watches, except they have different markings on them. And then usually they came in a base metal case. So I'll show you some pictures. So here's some, 3 different versions of the 992B, the military ones. This one says US Govt, and then it's on the train bridge. Then we have US Army on the barrel bridge, and then Bureau of Aeronautics, US Navy. There may be other versions, but these are the ones I found so far. And it's fun to go looking for the different varieties of these, and the markings are usually, not very many were made with these markings, usually from very early in the war. So just to kind of give you an idea, this is my version of what a military 992B should look like. So usually they had very low serial numbers early in the 1940 to 45. They had this kind of a single sunk dial and a sort of base metal chrome plated case with blue hands, and they were marked usually with some kind of military designation. So and interestingly, the early versions of 992Bs had a gold center wheel, and then later on they made a brass center wheel. So you see that they're very characteristic for the military versions from the 1940s. And this is a really neat one that I have a couple of these, but this one has got a black dial and says Bureau of Aeronautics, U.S. Navy on the dial, GCT, and then also says that on the movement and on the back of the case. And so it's I'm sure this was for a specific purpose. Some of these watches were made with black dials, But yeah, this is a really, really rare watch. I think there's probably 20 or 30 of these that I've documented in the last 10 or 15 years. So if you see one of these, it's worth grabbing because they're really cool historical and rare timepieces. And then this is one that looks like for the U.S. Army. And I have another version of this I'll talk about later on the prototype watches. So that's the 992B, which was, again, the Ellenbar Extra hairspring and all the innovations that they had up to that point. Really, really good watches and easy to work on. Then a similar watch, 2974B, was basically a 17 jewel version of that watch. And again, a 16 size watch. This one is a hacking watch, again, has a hacking seconds feature, which if you pull up on the crown, this little tiny wire comes out and stops the balance wheel and lets you set it to the watch, to the chronometer that you're trying to connect it to. They had different serial number ranges. Either they started with a K or 2K. And they also had a snap-on inner dust cover. And they had that, that characteristic Hamilton dial that I showed you earlier on the 974 special. They brought it back for this watch. And also you'll see these on 950B watches with the characteristic hands. And so, yeah, there's different markings on these also. You'll see there's a serial number in the corner there. And some of them are marked on the back with ordnance markings and sort of information about the year and things like that. And it says U.S. Navy comparing watch. And they're all made out of base metal, and they have this inner snap cover ring on it. So a neat watch. I inherited one of these from my grandpa, and it was engraved on the inside the back with the ship USS Escape, which I did some research on. And so whoever got this watch, they marked the boat that they were on in World War II inside the back. So that was kind of neat. I also have a mystery 2974B watch that I got from my grandfather. And this one has no serial number on it and no hack spring installed. And it's not marked US government. But it has a sticker in the back for the U.S. Naval Ordnance Testing Station. And so my guess is this was shipped from Hamilton to California to do whatever they do at the U.S. Naval Ordnance Testing Station, setting off bombs and whatnot. They might have sent them some prototype watches. So this is kind of a neat watch. And I've taken this apart, and you can still see the mill finish inside that on that dial plate. There's no serial number ever has been on this watch. So it's kind of a neat timepiece, a bit of a mystery for me. So that's 2974B. Another B watch from World War II, and this is a classic one, is the 4992B, the navigational master watch. And this is a 22 jewel version of the 992B. Again, if you pull up on the crown, it'll allow you to stop the second hand. And lots of different markings on this movement. But these are very characteristic because they have a black dial, which looks like this. And I bring these to work all the time. I have several of them. I bring them to work and I show people, and this is a true 24-hour movement. So this clock is only right once a day if it stops, not twice a day. Because it goes around 24 hours like the military does. They use 24-hour clocks. And so, yeah, it's kind of hard to tell the time unless you're used to it. It looks like the wrong time, but it's actually quite accurate. I'll go back here. Yeah, so they made a lot of these. So these are not a rare watch. These are, around 120,000 were made. And they all have a 4C serial number on them. And what's interesting about that is after Hamilton's stopped making watches in 1969, they still had some of these plates left over. And so they converted those to 992B watches, and they're not considered military, but there's probably several hundred that are 992B watches with a 4C serial number, which is because all these watches were made sort of interchangeable, the plates and the parts and everything sort of fit together. So you can see a 4C serial number, and I have a few of those. They're quite rare. but they're in 992B sort of watches from the late 60s. This is what I get into a lot when I look at on eBay. If you do a search for Hamilton 4992B, you'll probably find 10 to 20 of these at any one time and various prices. But anyway, the ones that I look for are the ones that have these kind of unique markings. Like this one's for U.S. Army Air Corps. And then a very common one is U.S. government. And another rare one is Bureau of Aeronautics, U.S. Navy. These are from the early part of the production run. And then I have this kind of unique one that's Air Corps, U.S. Army, that I bought at a Jones Rand auction. And then a lot of them don't have any markings on them. So one of the gentlemen who bought a watch from me at the regional, he bought this one right here because it said U.S. government, and he was going to have it converted into a wristwatch by some folks, I guess, up in Fort Collins. They machine a case and they fit the watch movement in there. So he was excited to find one that had the U.S. government markings on it. So, but this is what you can do is once you go into it, you can start finding all kinds of variations, and that's what gets me excited. So I always like finding something new like this is really, really cool, you know. When you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of these, when you find one that's unique and new, that's usually where I get excited. Yep. So this is what the movement looks like. This bridge in the middle here is an extra bridge connected to this wheel, and that connects to the second hand. So this is a center second. It has a giant second hand that goes around, and that's why it's a 22 jewel watch versus a 21 jewel watch. And in fact, some of the early versions of the 4992B are marked twice with the adjusted temperature in 6 positions. You'll see right here, adjusted temp in 6 positions, but underneath this bridge in the middle, it also says adjusted temp in 6 positions because they use the plates from 992B, early 992B production. They're all interchangeable, and they just added this bridge on top of it. So because they covered up the adjustment markings, they actually engraved the second set over here. I think I've tracked about 15 of those that have the double markings. Again, really, really down in the weeds, and unless you're a Hamilton military collector, you probably don't care, but it's kind of fun to see this kind of different variations. All right, some other things around the 4992B. So you can buy them with these original boxes, which are kind of cool. They're like a cardboard box. This side fits into that side. They usually have like a little cloth sack that goes with them. Another thing that goes with the 4992Bs is these metal canisters. And I think these are essentially, you put the watch in here and then put this lid on it and lock it on there. And the watch is suspended by springs. And then you have a little viewing window. And that allows the watch to be, say, isolated from magnetic fields. So on an airplane, for example, or military type application, it will keep it from from getting any kind of magnetism, and just generally protect it in this metal box. So that's kind of neat. You can buy these boxes. What's interesting is the box goes for about the same. The metal box goes about the same as the watch, and the combination together is way more than what you'd buy for each one individually. So buyer beware a little bit on these things. Just because it has the metal suspension navigation box doesn't mean it's really worth that much. And another thing that this is an official Hamilton rubber sheath and a little leather strap. This thing is kind of rare. It also goes for several $100s, even though it's just back in the day it was just to protect the watch. But you can always find different things about these watches, and it's really interesting that something like that would be worth $200 or something. One of my favorite watches of all time is the Hamilton 3992B. Again, this was for World War II. And the difference between this one and the 4992B is this is a 12-hour version. And so because the US military wanted 24-hour versions, these ones are mostly produced for the British Navy and the Canadian Navy. So, and these have a 3C serial number. And they're made about 2,400 of them. And when I lived in Canada, actually, was able to purchase one of these from a friend of mine, and he purchased it from I don't know if it was in the 70s or wherever, 80s, from the Esquimalt Naval Base on Vancouver Island as a military surplus, and I'm sure he paid, you know, less than $100 for it, and I paid way more than $100 for it. But it's a really rare watch with a 80% silver case, and it has a characteristic 24-hour dial there, even though it's a 12-hour clock. So this is what the movement looks like. You can see it's basically very similar to the 492B, except for the markings and the serial number. And this is the box that they usually are supplied in. It's like a cushioned little box with a viewing window. And I've got lots of these wooden boxes, and these wooden boxes go for hundreds of dollars. It's hard to believe that it's just a wooden box, but you know, you might spend $200 or $300 on it. And I've done me and my sons have done some refurbishing of these, and it's kind of a fun project to replace the felt and restain them and stuff like that. This is the version that went over to the UK. So you see it has the broad arrow on it, on the dial and on the movement. And it's interesting, marked US Navy Bureau of Ships. And they have the blue screw. So these are the ones that went over to the UK, and those they're more plentiful. But they also converted some of them into this version, which is called like a work study dial. And this is interesting because this is now they put a new dial on it by Watch Dials of Burford. And anyway, it's a decimal second. So this basically means every one of these little seconds is 1/100th of a minute. And so it made it a lot easier for people to time things and just say that was, you know, 10.92 minutes or something like that versus 10 minutes and so many seconds, you know. So yeah, so that it de-emphasized the hours and the minutes, and mostly for the second hand. But you'll see a number of these out there. And then also I found some Zenith pocket watches that have the same dial that are a Swiss watch company that looks exactly the same. So I think this was done probably in the 70s is my understanding. And yeah, on a naval dockyard. So all kinds of varieties. And so, you know, I track all these, and I've probably tracked about 60 or 70 out of the 2,500, maybe, and all the different versions and things like that. So it's kind of fun to do the research. And then another kind of cool watch, it's a watch and a stopwatch. It's the Model 23 Hamilton. So this is a very complicated movement. So this is one of the ones as an amateur watchmaker I would not tackle. And I'll show you a picture of it in a second, but it has a stopwatch that if you press the crown, it'll start the stopwatch. It has the second hand going around. And then when it gets to a minute, there's a minute register here, and it keeps track of the minutes and the seconds. And then if you press the button again, it stops. And if you press the button again, it resets to 0. But it also has the time, so it keeps both functions. And they made quite a number of these, 23,000 or so, and they came in nickel silver cases. And this is the movement. So yeah, way more complicated than my skill set, but still, these work really well. And I've got a number of them, and some of them with the original boxes and things like that. So really collectible. Really not cheap at all. These go for $700 or $800 sometimes, and then the original box maybe even more. So that's what the box would look like. 16 size chronograph, designed to meet the Navy specifications, and they usually come with the serial numbers of the movement and case matching the watch inside. So kind of a neat box. I like these little boxes. And then this is an advertisement from Hamilton. And he's looking for a U-boat in the sky. So he's going to bomb this U-boat, and he's trying to figure out his navigation. And he's using a sextant of some sort. This is over my head, but he's got the watch on there, and that helps him figure out his location. And so he's using this Model 23 to help win the war, you know. So it's kind of a neat advertisement. 1943. Don't forget to buy U.S. war bonds, right? Help America win. Yeah, so kind of historical and neat that they have advertising with the watch on it. So this one, switching gears to a larger chronometer watches. This is a 35 size, so this is, I don't know, roughly 2.5 inches in diameter. Pretty heavy watch, and this is the 21 jewel pocket watch. This is kind of like the version of the 36 size that from World War I, but a lot more technology built into this. And again, it has the wind indication to tell you how many hours since it was wound up. Very, very accurate timepiece. And they made roughly 10,000 of these in these base metal cases, and then roughly 13,000 in gimbals. So you can find both kinds just about anytime you want. You could find it on eBay or whatever. Pretty cool watches. You would not want to carry this in your pocket. Again, very, very heavy watch, but again, very accurate. This is a pin set. So if you press the little pin in, you can set the time. This is the gimbaled version of it, where it's in a brass sort of tub, and then the gimbals allow it to stay level while it's in the boat, so that it keeps better accuracy while it's perfectly level. So as the boat's rocking around, the watch stays perfectly level. And this is a picture of the movement for the Model 22. So there's usually a dust cover that goes over it, and then they usually have something about the Navy or the Army in 1943 in the serial number. So I've never tackled taking one of these apart, but it's more like a clock, I think, than a watch in many ways. Yep. And this kind of talks about, this shows the picture of the back of the chronometer watch, and then the kind of box that it was kept in. Again, a little cushioned wooden box with a felt liner, and you could see through the window. And then even had outer boxes too. And this box here is what the one I got from my grandfather was new old stock that he bought. He saw an advertisement in the paper for military surplus, and he went to a store and bought it for $50, and it was in the original outer cardboard box too. So that's kind of neat, but you can't find them for $50 these days. Yes, another cool watch is more of a clock, is the Model 37500 elapsed time clock. This is a very complicated dashboard clock that was worked in conjunction with Elgin. It has lots of stuff going on here. It's a 16 jewel movement, but it has the dials for the 24-hour around the outside, and it has the seconds indicator, and then it has here, and then it has a chronograph, so you can use it as a stopwatch if you press the button, and minute indicator, and then it also has a lapse time. So if you're on a several hour flight and you're coming off of an aircraft carrier or something, then, and it also has the date. So this allows you to keep track of your fuel and things like that. You know how long it's been since you took off, and it keeps track of the hours and things like that. So pretty complicated clock. And again, this is one of the ones I wouldn't tackle as if I would give this to the experts to refurbish if I had to do that. I bought one of these we had an auction in the Chapter 121 in Vancouver. I got it for a really good deal, and they go for probably $300 or $400 on eBay. And then you can see the back. Some of these are marked with Elgin, some are marked with Hamilton. So I'm not sure how they share the parts or the cases and things, but there was a dual effort to make these. And this is what they were used for. They were in the airplane instrument panels. You can see a picture of one right here. And this is the kind of planes that they were on. This is a Vought F4U Corsair. So these are the fighter planes from World War II that took off and landed on aircraft carriers. And these were, just as a side note, this was one of the first airplanes that had retractable, 100% retractable wheels. And so they were very aerodynamic and helped win the war. So, and the clocks in them helped the pilots, with their timing. Another cool device that Hamilton made was a map measurer. I don't know if you guys have seen these before, but they're used to, it has a little wheel on it and a little dial, And so if you're not familiar with, like Germany or France, and so you have a map and you want to know exactly how many miles your troops are going to go, you can trace on the physical map with the little wheel, and it'll tell you the exact distance because you do a conversion, and you can use that to tell, so if it's not a linear, like as the crow flies, most places aren't, you have to follow the roads or the rivers. And yeah, so that gives you an exact distance, so you can better accurately predict how long that's going to take for that excursion. So they make quite a few numbers of these, so these are quite common and not very expensive, but kind of a neat little side thing they made. So the last I want to talk about for World War II was the Model 21 ship's chronometer, and this is an 85 size, essentially a clock. And you think, well, the 14 joule movement, it's not very accurate, but this is probably the most accurate, one of the most accurate timepieces ever made for a mechanical clock. And they made quite a number of these. And this, you can imagine the supply chain for chronometers was cut off from Switzerland or France or wherever they made them back in World War II. So the US had to step up, and manufacturers had to make chronometers which could be very accurate in terms of coordinating the ships and the attacks. And sometimes there was 100 ships that would be in one sort of attack, and they all had to have very accurate longitude and locations. And so this had to be very, very precise. And it was, I think it's accurate to within a few seconds a month generally, which is way more than a railroad grade accuracy. And these were mounted in gimbals and in boxes. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. So some of the cool design features is this has a fusee, which allows the mainspring to, as the mainspring winds down, the tension, the size of the diameter of the chain, it changes so that it keeps a constant force. It has a solid balance wheel, which you'd think would be interesting, but it has this Ellen bar extra helical hairspring, and then a détente to help keep the time, and then different size timing screws. So this watch could be adjusted very, very precisely to within tenths of a second in a month, and that is what was needed for the accurate navigation. It's a very, very big, this box is probably almost a foot square, to give you a perspective. And an interesting story, the first time I gave this talk, a very similar version of this talk, I brought one of these to the Chapter 121 meeting, and I brought this chronometer, which weighs quite a bit, in the boxes to my office. And when I bent down to put it down, I split the back of my pants all the way from the top to the bottom. And so I had to use binder clips to shut my pants all day long at work. And then after work, I gave a talk with binder clips in my pants, because this thing is so big. So anyway, yeah, these are pretty cool, and you can find them with all the numbers matching between the movement, the dial, the box, and everything. And these go for, generally $2,000 to $3,000 right now, but they're readily available, and I'm glad I have one, just because it's just a historical timepiece, right? All right, so another version of that is the Model 121, which they didn't make very many of them. So this is essentially the same clock, except it has a 24-hour dial. And this was U.S. Army Air Force asked Hamilton to make that for him. And they kept them in sets of 3s on a ship in a box like this. And that way, in case any two of them could be different, but if one of them's different, they had to have 3. If the two of them had to be show the same time, then they knew that was the right time. So if you only had 2 of them and one of them was off, you couldn't tell what the right time was. So yeah, so they kept them in a safe place, and they had a triple set of them all the time to make sure they had at least 2 that were keeping the accurate time. And then later on, after the first 18 or so, some instrument companies purchased, but they only made about 40 of these with the 24-hour dial. And an even rarer version of the, so that's what it looks like in the box. And this is one of the clocks or chronometers that's on my wish list. I don't have one of these, but they don't come up for sale very often, and when they do, they're quite expensive. So I'll have to save up for that. Another version is the Model 221, which has a 4-orbit dial. So they only made 15 of these guys, and they had the wind indicator like the normal ones, but then the second hand is over here, and the minute hand is in the middle, and then they have the day of the week is at the bottom, and the hour is over here. And you might say, why do they need the day of the week? And it's probably because when they're flying around or on ships in the ocean, they may cross the international date line, and so this way they can accurately tell what day it is, because it could get confusing if you're out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So, but they didn't make very many of these, just a handful. So that's the World War II version. A bunch of different timepieces, pretty exciting, a nice, a lot of different variety there. But I wanted to go into with the part of the talk that I haven't never done before is prototype watches. And while I have maybe 10 or 15 more minutes left, I'll go into that, and then we'll wrap up. So I'm going to jump right in. And some of the first ones they made are actually, so they're actually versions of regular production watches, but they were trying them out for the military. So this is a 10 size military watch that it has a second setting model. So this one, you can see here, it says serial number sample, and this was bought in a Skinner auction from Dr. Gelson, who was the last president of Hamilton Watch Company, his personal collection. And so some of these are prototypes that he must have gathered back in the day. So this one is kind of neat because it's a 10 size watch. You don't see too many military 10 size watches. My guess is it maybe was made for officers or something like that didn't want to carry a bigger watch in their pocket. But yeah, but there is a lot of 10 size Hamilton 917s, but not too many that have the military marking. So another one that was, again, we already showed you that there was a Hamilton 974 special that was made. Only 81 of them were made. This one was one of the prototypes for that. It says serial number sample, U.S. Navy Bureau of Ships, second setting. So this is probably one of the first ones they made to send to the Navy and say, hey, what do you think about this? And the Navy said, yeah, I'll take 81 of those. And then they made the rest of them. So, and again, a lot of these watches came from the Skinner auctions over the last few years. This is a prototype of the Hamilton Model 23 that we talked about. This did go into production. And you can see this one has its sample number 52. Now, I'm not 100% sure what all these different numbers mean, but my guess is that they're numbered sequentially for sending to the military, and they keep them separate, and they know which versions are which. They numbered them with these individual either model or sample numbers. But it's kind of neat to see, like almost this would be one of the very first ones made, and very similar to what the production was, but just a sample for evaluation probably back in the early part of the war. This is, again, a similar one, a 2974B prototype. So we talked about the 17 jewel 2974B, and this one is called Model 13. So this one, and it also is marked with pendant set over here. So these are, I don't know how many of these are made, but very, very few. And this one came in a chrome with a case with a display case on the back. So these are watches that eventually did become production watches. Here's another version of, remember we talked about the 992B Bureau of Aeronautics, U.S. Navy with GCT on the dial, Greenwich Civil Time. Well, this one is a 992E, which means Ellenbar. And they did make several of these, but this would be one of the very first ones, serial number sample on the back. So I have this one in my personal collection, so it's kind of a neat one. Again, I don't know how many of these are made, but when you look at these, they're almost in mint condition. So you imagine they were never used. They were just kept in either as prototypes at Hamilton or whatever. But this was again from Dr. Gelson's collection. And another 992B, this one's marked US Army, but again, this one has the word sample on the back. So a brand new, never used version of a 992B military watch. It had interestingly has this regular serial number on it, but for some reason it has a sample on the back. So these were, again, the Skinner auctions are, whenever you see one of these prototypes come up, they say the auction estimate is $200 to $300 or $300 to $400 or something, and they go for like $3,000 to $4,000. So that's kind of, so if you want to grab some of these prototype samples, you have to have deep pockets. And this one, the last one that I'm going to show you that actually went to production is a Model 22 prototype. I don't have a picture of the movement, but evidently it says sample 73 on it. And it was in the auction, it had extra dials and crowns and a glass crystal. So my guess it's one of the very first Model 22s that were made. Then Hamilton had some other ones that didn't go into production. So this one is very, very similar to, so this would be one of the ones that went to production, at 3992B, but it says sample 43 on it. So that means it's one of the very first ones that were made. And so it's very similar to the regular production examples. However, there's a couple other versions of this 3992B. This one was made for Bureau of Aeronautics, US Navy, and it had a special dial, and it's marked Bureau of Aeronautics, US Navy, and it's marked Model 27 on the movement. This did not go into production. The Navy didn't want the 12-hour version. In fact, they liked the black dial 24-hour version. And then another one that's very similar to that is a 3992B prototype produced for the US Army Air Corps. So you can see here, it's marked US Army Air Corps, US Army Air Corps on the case. And based on what I looked it up on Wikipedia, US Army Air Corps was from 1926 to 1941. And then they switched to US Army Air Force until 47, and then that became the Air Force. So this must have been produced right around 1941. But again, because it had a 12-hour dial and a 12-hour movement, the Army said, no, I want the 24-hour movement. So they only produced a few. And so most of the 3992Bs were made for the Canadian and the Royal Navies, and that's what went into production. Then we get some other weird stuff. So this is a very similar watch to the Model 23 stopwatch, except this one is just a chronograph. It does not have the time functions. It just has the stopwatch functions. It's called a Model 26. So very similar to Model 23, but this one has a white dial instead of a black dial. And they only made, I think, 5 of these. This auction had 2 of them in it. And I have one of these. And that's what it looks like. So it's very similar to that complicated Model 23 movement that I would never tackle in terms of repairing, because I'd get all these little bridges mixed up, but it also says Model 26 on it. It has a 004P serial number. So very, very rare, and did not go into normal production. And then we have a really, really cool watch clock called 2992B. So this one was, the US Navy wanted a large diameter 37 size dial, and eventually they settled on, I think, the Model 22 35 size that we talked about earlier. So as far as I know, they made 3 of these guys. This one here has markings 2992B and sample 36. And then you can see the dial is much bigger than the movement. And then the sample 37 must be around somewhere, because the next one here is mounted in a gimbaled box. And this is sample 38, 2992B. So as far as I know, there's only a handful of these around, and yeah, so it kind of never went into production. They switched gears and went with the 35 size Model 22. But just kind of a neat, little prototype that you would be hard pressed to find these. I have one, and I know somebody else on this call has another one. And if you find the one in the middle, you'll have to fight us over that one, because we'll probably be high bidders on that. So anyway, so that's the 2992B. Yes, and then the next one is a 6992B. And as far as I know, there's I don't know how many of these are made, but this is sample number 32. And this was basically, it looks like the 992B, except it's a little bit simpler finish. And it was made for the Frankfurt Arsenal, according to this Hamilton tag that's on here. And it's basically they did not go into production. So that's the 6992B. And then, yeah, the 7992B. I believe some of these were actually made, but this is a 37 size sort of giant pocket watch with a 24-hour dial marked Bureau of Aeronautics, U.S. Navy. And again, this one is marked Model 35. So possibly they might have made some of these. I have never seen one. This is from a talk that was from Art Zimmerla in 2003 at NAWCC Regional. So I borrowed some of his information. So some of these are, you know, they're dead ends, but that makes them neat from a collector standpoint, right? And I'm always on the lookout for something new. So there's probably some other prototypes I haven't seen. And anyway, that's my talk. And this is some of the sources I've gathered the information from my own collection and from these other sources online, and this handy dandy book I got from Art Zimmerla from 2003. And then obviously Marvin Whitney, Military Timepieces, is a classic, which he was directly handling all these watches back in the day. So that is all I had to talk about. So I'll open it up if there's any questions or comments or anything anybody wants to ask me.
Do you know why the 14 joules are more accurate than the higher joule counts?
Yeah, it's not necessarily the joules. It is the, I actually have some of that background for you. It's actually the rest of the watch that's more accurate. So if you read up on this, it says that the hairspring and balance assembly, it says that they produce rates that have never been attained in chronometers. He said he had 1.55, 0.5, and 1.2 seconds in a month. In fact, most of the ones had 0 deviation in 35 days at 3 different temperatures. And some of the reasons why that is because of this helical hairspring, this Bar extra, and also the shape of the hairspring. Basically, it minimized the isochronal error. So they said the error never exceeded a few hundredths of a second. And then also the shape of the balance, it was more sturdy, it was a solid balance wheel. It's kind of an oval shape, elliptical shape. And also the detente, that it's basically a small part that was made by this gentleman who converted his jewelry store into a manufacturing facility for these small parts, and was one of the very few people in the world that could make that accurately. But so all that stuff together made the watch very, very precise. So I think the 14 joules is just because that's the number of bridges and wheels it had, but the design of it was very, very interesting. I didn't get into that, but yeah, there's lots of, if you read up in Marvin Whitney, you can read a lot more about that.
Thank you.
No problem.
John, Terry Jones here. I have a couple of Hamilton grade 4992B Model 5s. One's the military dial, and it's got a red sweep hand. And I thought that was sort of unusual or rare. And then I picked up another one that was the Hamilton 4992B Model 60-minute conventional dial, also with the red sweep hand. Is the red sweep hand rare, or has that been a replacement by someone, or what would be your opinion on that?
Yeah, so my guess, Terry, would be that would be a replacement. most of the ones I've seen that are in the original boxes, something like this. Yeah, so they all have white hands on the center seconds, and a lot of the watches from 499TBs were converted to 12-hour dials after the war, so they were easy to, because obviously the 24-hour dial is hard to read.
Right.
It reminds me of, I collect goofy pocket watch or goofy wrist watches, which are counterclockwise, and people didn't like them back in the day because they're hard to read because they're backwards. Probably similarly for the 499TB. My guess is those center second hands got replaced, but you know, like I said, Terry, I'm always learning, so it's interesting that you see lots of different variations. So who knows what's right? I can't go back in time, but I wish I could, right?
Well, I sort of like the red. It's easier for me to read.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. It works, right? It sells a second.
Yeah.
That's all that matters.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, John, this is Rhett.
Hey, Rhett.
I just wanted to add to your 7992B at the end there.
Yeah.
That specific watch is actually in the NAWCC museum on display there. So if anybody ever wants to see that, it is on display there. And
Cool.
also the Model 22, the first serial number Model 22, 2F001, and the first model 3992B, which would be 3C001, are also both in the NAWCC collection.
That's cool. Do you know if they've made any more of those 7992Bs or if that's the only one?
I think I've seen 2 of them that were actually marked 7992B, and then 1 or 2 that had 4992B movements. They're the same movement. Everything's physically the same as a 4992B, just with the larger dial and case. I've seen a couple 4992Bs, one I think without a serial number, and one with a serial number that was either marked model or something or sample something, that had the same dial and case. So they were probably prototypes as well.
Yeah, so if anybody doesn't know, that Rhett is an expert on these prototypes, and I've learned a lot from him, and he shared me some of the pictures I shared were from Rhett, so he's definitely a resource on the sample models and things like that. I appreciate all your input, Rhett. Thanks for all your help on helping me prepare some of the information.
No problem.
I also found interestingly last year a 3992B with a 4C serial number that looks like it's new old stock. So I'm always finding different versions and varieties, but yeah, so I don't think we'll ever stop learning about this stuff, but this is what a classic case of an inch wide and a mile deep, right? So I don't collect watches, wrist watches, or very many clocks. I collect a little bit of things I like, and then I dive in and go crazy on them. So you guys are subject to all my 15 years of research for the last, but that last hour, but that's what makes it fun for me. Anything else? If not, if you can think of something, send me an email, send me a link, or send me through the chapter, and I'll be happy to share anything, pictures or any information I have. I have lots of Excel databases on these things, so let me know if you want information. I'll be happy to share it.
John, thanks so much. Before Ken closes the meeting, just to confirm, it's all right if we record and publish this on the website?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, the amazing thing is you guys got me to stop talking about it. That's pretty amazing.
Ken Rydell, are you there? Well, if there are no objections, no other questions, let us adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your attention. Thank you, John.
Thanks, guys.
Great-
Okay. Hope to
great
see you in
program.
person. Thank
All
you.
right.
Yes.
Very
Good
good.
job.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Very interesting. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.